You've probably felt it that moment, right? Someone does something or says something and it just catches you completely off guard.
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe it's you. You do something, maybe snap at someone and immediately think, wait, where did that come from? Why did I act that way? It's disorienting.
It really is. And, we often feel confused, maybe even a bit helpless. When people, when they hit us with these elaborate cover stories or they start blaming scapegoats, or they pull you into these dramas they seem to control, and you're just left spinning.
And it's not just them, like you said. We see it in ourselves, too, suddenly offending a boss or, a good friend.
Right.
Or getting really enthusiastic about some project that, looking back, was just foolish. And you think, I wasn't really thinking clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're not quite sure where that impulse originated.
So, okay, our mission in this deep dive is to really try and unpack these perplexing moments. We're digging into Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature, and we want to uncover those underlying forces, the things that compel us and others to act in ways that are often, way beyond our conscious awareness.
And it's important to say, this isn't just about, analyzing other people from a distance.
Right.
It's really about gaining some radical self-awareness, giving you, the listener, powerful new ways to sort of navigate your world with more clarity, maybe more purpose.
Definitely expecting some aha moments here.
Oh, I think you'll get them. Get ready.
Okay, let's start with why we act the way we do. Those unseen forces. You mentioned our primitive roots still influencing us even now.
That's a crucial starting point, yeah. Because humans, we remain highly susceptible to the moods and emotions of people around us. It's almost like emotional contagion. And this drives all sorts of behavior, unconsciously imitating others, wanting what they have.
Keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing?
Sort of, yeah, but deeper. Or getting swept up in these viral feelings online, anger, outrage.
Oh, yeah, you see that everywhere.
Right. And we might genuinely believe we're acting of our own free will, but we're often completely unaware of how deeply this emotional permeability affects our decisions.
So it's like we're wired for this group dynamic almost. What else from our sort of ancient past is still shaping us today?
Well, there's our deep-seated need to continually rank ourselves, measure our self-worth through status.
Really? Like ancient status hierarchies.
You see it vividly in hunter-gatherer cultures, yeah, and Greene even points to parallels in chimpanzee troops. It's fundamental.
Wow.
And then there are our tribal instincts, that tendency to instantly divide people into us and them, insiders and outsiders.
That feels very current, too.
It is. And what about the idea of wearing masks? That feels modern, maybe, but you're saying it has ancient roots.
It does. Greene argues we have this primal need to wear masks, to disguise any behavior that might be frowned upon by our tribe, whatever that tribe is. And this leads to what he calls a shadow personality. It's like a hidden container for all those darker desires or traits we repress because they're not acceptable. A shadow personality.
Yeah. Our ancestors might have imagined the shadow came from, the spirits or demons needing exorcism.
Right, like possession.
Exactly. Today, we might just say, oh, something came over me, but it's tapping into that same feeling, being driven by some unseen force within us.
What's really striking, though, is how these primitive roots haven't faded away, even with all our technology and supposed sophistication.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah. You argue we've never been more under the sway of human nature and its destructive potential than right now.
I think Greene makes a strong case for that. Take social media, for instance. It's dramatically heightened our emotional permeability.
How so?
Those viral effects, anger, outrage, excitement, they sweep through us at lightning speed. It makes us incredibly vulnerable to, say, manipulative leaders or online mobs.
And the anonymity, maybe?
Well, yeah, the aggression that's displayed so openly in the virtual world, it makes it so much easier to play out those shadow sides without immediate repercussions.
That makes sense. And what about comparing ourselves? Envy. Status seeking.
Oh, it's intensified massively. With our ability to communicate so quickly with so many people, it's like we're constantly measuring ourselves against others. It just accelerates the impact of these ancient traits.
It really drives the point home. And this leads us to another major theme, doesn't it? The illusion of rationality.
Yes, this is huge. Think about ancient Athens. Political figures like Pericles, they genuinely believed they were entirely rational. They thought they had realistic goals, good reasons for everything. And when things went wrong, it was always the opposition or the gods or bad luck. never their own flawed reasoning.
It's chilling, though, how the apparent rationality led to so much chaos and self-destruction back then. How do we, today, fall into that same trap, believing we're rational when maybe we're not?
Well, Greene's insight, drawing from Pericles' realization, is profound. Pericles saw his fellow Athenians weren't truly rational in the way they thought.
Okay.
They were often just selfish and shrewd, guided by really base emotions, hunger for power, attention, money. Now, for those purposes, they could be tactical, even clever.
Sure.
But their maneuvers rarely led to anything truly lasting or beneficial for the whole. The danger is we disguise these same base emotions as logical decisions today. We tell ourselves a story about why we want what we want.
So it's not always cold, hard logic driving the train, even when we think it is.
Not at all. And Greene talks about something he calls high-grade irrationality.
High-grade irrationality, what's that?
It happens when emotions, anger, excitement, maybe resentment, suspicion, become really inflamed. They intensify into what he calls a reactive state.
Okay.
And in that state, everything you see or hear gets interpreted through the lens of that dominant emotion. It colors everything.
Ah, I think I know that feeling.
Right. And that reactive state is the source of so many crises, conflicts, disastrous decisions, violence, manic obsessions, greed, that intense desire to control others.
Wow.
The goal really is to learn to recognize that reactive state as it's happening and pull back. Before you say or do something you'll deeply regret.
It's like we walk into these mind traps, as you call them, without even realizing it. And one of the most common is conviction bias.
Yes, conviction bias.
Yeah.
This is where we cling to ideas that are maybe secretly pleasing to us. Even if there are doubts, rational reasons to question them.
We push them aside.
We push them aside, yeah. We go that extra mile to convince ourselves, defending the idea with like extra vehemence. And the insidious part is we think, well, this idea must be true if I feel so strongly about defending it. The energy itself feels like proof.
And this applies to how we see leaders too, right?
Absolutely. If a leader expresses an opinion with, heated words, big gestures, maybe colorful metaphors, and just this deep well of conviction,
We tend to buy it.
we tend to assume they've examined the idea carefully, that it must be sound. But someone who expresses nuances, whose tone is maybe more hesitant, they seem weak.
Yeah.
And this makes us incredibly susceptible to, well, salesmen, demagogues, anyone who uses conviction as a performance to convince and deceive rather than reflecting sound reasoning.
That's a bit scary. And another trap you mentioned is group bias.
Hugely important. We are fundamentally social animals. The feeling of isolation. It's deeply depressing, even terrifying for most people.
Sure.
So we experience this tremendous relief when we find others who think the same way we do. It feels good. It feels validating.
And we adopt their ideas.
Often, yes, we
Yeah.
take up their ideas, maybe without even realizing the influence, just to maintain that feeling of belonging. Few people would ever admit, oh, I believe this because my friends do. But the unconscious shaping is powerful.
It's fascinating how strong that pull is. But what about when the pressure isn't just conformity, but like real stress? Does that reveal something different?
Yeah, you're touching on the idea Greene calls rising pressure. Stress, intense situations, they reveal flaws in people that they've carefully concealed.
How so?
That cool mask of self-control slips, maybe even shatters. People suddenly lash out in anger, or they reveal a paranoid streak you never saw, or become hypersensitive and petty over small things.
So crisis reveals character.
In a way, yes. It's often wise to observe people in those high-pressure moments. It can be a surprisingly accurate way to judge their true character, what comes out when the careful facade cracks.
Okay, this is all quite eye-opening about why we act the way we do. So how do we fight back? How do we bring out our inner Pericles, become more rational?
Right. The first step, Greene emphasizes, is to know yourself thoroughly. Your emotional self, as he calls it, thrives on ignorance.
Ignorance of itself.
Exactly. The moment you become truly aware of how it operates, how you operate under stress, what patterns emerge, it starts to lose its grip.
So reflection is key.
Deep reflection. How do you operate under stress? Do you become eager to please? Do you tend to bully? Do you become deeply mistrustful? Look at the patterns in your past ineffective decisions. What underlying insecurity might be driving them?
And understanding strengths, too.
Yes, understanding your genuine strengths helps you resist that pull of the group bias, helps you stand your ground.
That self-awareness piece feels absolutely crucial. But, okay, what about dealing with other people? That seems to be where a lot of emotional turmoil comes from for most of us.
It often is, but Greene argues it doesn't have to be quite so draining. We spend so much energy judging people, wishing they were different.
Guilty as charged.
Right. Instead, he suggests you must try to accept people as facts. See them more like phenomena, as neutral as, I don't know, comets or plants.
Neutral. That sounds hard.
It is hard. But the idea is they simply exist in all their varieties. Try to work with what they give you instead of constantly resisting and trying to change them into what you want them to be.
Make it a game.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Make understanding people a fun game, an observational challenge. Except that, yes, people are irrational sometimes, but hey, so are you. We all are.
Okay.
This kind of radical acceptance, if you can cultivate it, brings a sense of calm. It helps you observe people more dispassionately and gives you more mental space for clear thinking instead of just reacting emotionally.
That's a powerful reframing. And it sounds like it leads directly into the next idea, cultivating empathy.
It absolutely does. Cultivating empathy is described as therapeutic, even liberating. It draws you outside your own head and into the world of another person.
And that helps with rationality.
It shifts your whole way of thinking. It's seen as the essence of creative thinking, too. Greene highlights two main types: physical empathy and analytic empathy.
Physical empathy. Sounds intriguing. How does that actually work?
It's about really tuning in to nonverbal cues. Facial expressions, especially the fleeting ones, microexpressions, vocal inflections, tone of voice, tension in the body, nervous gestures, posture.
Reading body language, basically.
Deeper than just basic body language. It's about sensing the underlying emotion. This can make you seem almost psychic because you're reading between the lines of what people are actually saying.
Any specific examples?
Look for subtle signs of displeasure. Maybe a brief grimace before someone forces a smile when you approach them, or a quick eye roll they try to cover up.
Okay.
You could also pick up on unconscious mirroring. When people feel rapport, they might unconsciously cross their legs the same way or lean in together, even fall into similar breathing patterns. It signals connection, or lack thereof.
So it's about seeing what people are really feeling beneath the surface. And analytic empathy, what's that?
Analytic empathy complements the physical kind. It involves gathering more concrete information about others, their tastes, their values, their family background, their history.
Why is that helpful?
It's especially useful with people you find difficult to identify with. Maybe people who instinctively repel you or seem very different. It forces you to look beyond your initial reaction. Remember Abraham Lincoln's quote?
Remind me.
"I don't like that man. I must get to know him better."
Right. Challenge your own bias.
Exactly. It's about challenging your preconceptions and genuinely seeking to understand where they're coming from.
Can you give us an example of this kind of deep empathy in action? Someone who really embodied this.
Greene uses Ernest Shackleton, the polar explorer, as a great example. On his incredibly difficult expeditions, he developed this razor-sharp attunement to his men's shifting moods.
How did he show it?
Well, around the campfire, he wouldn't just give orders. He'd talk science with the scientists, discuss poets with the more aesthetic types. He genuinely tried to get into their particular spirit, understand what motivated them.
That takes effort.
Huge effort. There's a story where the cook was deeply upset about having to kill his pet cat. Food was scarce. Shackleton, recognizing the emotional toll, actually volunteered to do it for him. He didn't have to, but he understood the man's attachment. He also noticed one of the physicists was struggling physically and mentally. So, without making the man feel inadequate or like he was shirking, Shackleton quietly changed the work roster to give him lighter but still crucial tasks.
That's true empathy in leadership, understanding individual needs and adapting.
Exactly. It shows how that deep attunement can completely transform how you lead and interact.
And this connects really well to another law you mentioned, seeing through people's masks, which Greene calls the law of role-playing.
Indeed. People generally wear the mask that shows them off in the best possible light, right? Humble, confident, diligent, interested.
You'd all do it to some extent.
We're all expert actors, often unconsciously. We change our style, our voice, our body language, depending on who we're talking to. Think about how different you might sound talking to your boss versus talking to your young child.
Completely different persona, yeah. But you said the mask has cracks.
That's the key insight. People continually leak their true feelings, their unconscious desires, through nonverbal cues they can't completely control.
So how do we spot these cracks?
Your task is to look past the words, which can easily hide true feelings, and even past the easy-to-put-on facial expressions, like a standard smile. Watch for those fleeting micro-expressions.
Like the grimace you mentioned.
Exactly. Fleeting displeasure when you approach someone who maybe harbors negative thoughts about you, or that quick eye roll they try to cover up. These tiny signals are incredibly telling.
Okay. And what about cues for dominance or submission? That seems important in navigating hierarchies.
Definitely. People signal dominance in various ways. Showing up late can be a power move, implying their time is more valuable.
Subtle, but true.
Those who feel dominant often talk more, interrupt more frequently. In an argument, watch out for punctuation.
Punctuation.
That's when someone immediately tries to frame the conflict by saying, well, this all started when you did X last Tuesday. They're trying to pin the blame and control the narrative from the start.
Ah, I've seen that.
You might also notice a dominant partner in a couple making eye contact with you, the third party, but pointedly not with their own partner during the conversation. Yeah. Even a tight smile, where the facial muscles around the mouth tighten, even while smiling, can indicate irony, suppressed anger, or contempt, despite the surface appearance of friendliness.
I'm definitely going to be watching for tight smiles now. What about more subtle forms of dominance, maybe less confrontational?
Oh, yeah. There's a very subtle but powerful nonverbal way to assert dominance using the symptom.
The symptom, like being sick.
Exactly. Imagine a colleague who suddenly develops a mystery illness right before a major deadline or presentation. They subtly force others to pick up their slack, divert attention and sympathy towards their weakness, and gain a kind of control through vulnerability. That's the symptom at play.
Wow, that's manipulative.
It can be. Knowing these cues helps you gauge people's real confidence levels, their underlying intentions.
Yeah.
You want to be wary of insecure leaders. They often make poor decisions and can drag you down. And you can better identify those arrogant despots who are masters at getting others to serve them without giving much back.
This feels like essential social intelligence. And it leads us nicely to the idea of the true levers of influence. Because when people resist our ideas, our first instinct is often just to argue harder, right? To lecture or cajole them.
It is. And how often does that actually work?
Rarely. Usually just makes them dig their heels in more.
Exactly. They become more defensive. So the key strategy Greene proposes is to begin any attempt at influence by lowering their resistance first.
How do you do that?
You need to try and discern their underlying insecurities, what makes them feel defensive or uncertain, and then be careful not to inadvertently stir those up.
Okay.
Instead, think in terms of their self-interest, their self-opinion. What view of themselves do they need validated?
So it's about making them feel secure before you try to persuade them.
Precisely. Your first task is to instill a feeling of inner security. Mirror their values subtly. Show that you genuinely appreciate their perspective, their wisdom, their experience.
Build rapport.
Build rapport? Generate an atmosphere of mutual warmth. Getting them to laugh with you can be very powerful. And crucially, this works best if the feelings aren't completely faked. This is where that cultivated empathy we talked about really pays off. You need to find something you can genuinely appreciate.
That sounds like a much more sophisticated and maybe more ethical approach to influence. Any examples of this in action?
Greene tells the story of the French playwright Beaumarchais, who was struggling to get his controversial play The Marriage of Figaro approved by the censors.
Right. Censorship was strict then.
Very. So instead of arguing, he commissioned a special tribunal of academics, intellectuals, even high society ladies to review it. And he announced beforehand that he would submit unreservedly to every cut and change that the gentlemen and even the ladies present might deem appropriate.
He just gave them total control.
He made them feel like they had control. As Greene puts it, everyone wanted to add something of his own. By making them feel invested, like co-creators, he flattered their intelligence, lowered their resistance, and ultimately got the play approved with only minor changes.
That's brilliant. He played to their egos.
He lowered their defenses by validating their sense of importance and expertise. It's a fantastic example.
It really is. And you mentioned another technique, using their language.
Yes, attributed often to the famous therapist Milton Erickson. He had a case where a very religious husband came to him wanting a friendly divorce because, he said, he and his wife simply weren't in love anymore.
Okay, what did Erickson do?
Instead of challenging him directly, Erickson readily agreed with the husband's assessment. He validated his current perspective, using the husband's own framework of wanting something friendly and acknowledging the lack of love.
He met him where he was.
Exactly. Yeah. Only then did Erickson subtly begin to guide the conversation, exploring what friendly meant, what alternatives might exist. He eventually helped them reach a positive outcome, potentially reconciliation. by starting from the husband's own language and worldview.
Okay, so validate first, then guide. That makes a lot of sense. We've covered a lot about interacting with others, but sometimes the toughest battles are internal. Let's shift now to that idea you raised earlier. Character is fate. How do our deep patterns define our path?
It's a powerful concept. There's definitely a pattern to our life, often most visible in our recurring mistakes and failures.
We all have those.
Right. Our character, coming from the ancient Greek word for an engraving or stamping instrument, is seen as something so deeply ingrained or stamped within us that it compels us to act in certain ways, often beyond our conscious awareness and control.
So we're destined to repeat patterns.
Not necessarily destined, but strongly compelled. The insight here is that by recognizing the pattern, by bringing it into awareness, you gain the power to potentially alter it or work with it more consciously.
And this character has layers, you said.
Yes, Greene describes 3 essential components or layers. The deepest is sort of foundational, perhaps genetic predispositions, very deep inclinations.
Okay.
The second layer forms in our earliest years, particularly from birth to maybe age 3 or 4. Our brains are incredibly malleable then, and emotions are experienced much more intensely, creating really deep memory traces.
Like attachment theory.
Exactly. John Bowlby's work on attachment schemas is key here. How we bonded with our primary caregivers, whether it was secure, free autonomous, avoidant, dismissing, anxious, enmeshed, ambivalent, or disorganized, profoundly stamps us during this period.
And that affects adult relationships.
Massively. These early schemas essentially become unconscious blueprints for how we approach intimacy, trust, and emotional expression in our adult lives, often without us realizing their origin.
Wow. And the third layer, what happens as we get older?
Well, as we age, certain defensive qualities tend to solidify, partly because we're constantly being judged and appraised by others. We learn to protect ourselves.
We build walls.
We build walls, yeah. We can become more self-absorbed, more defensive, trying to protect our interests and our ego.
Yeah.
Ironically, this defensiveness can make us more rigid and less adaptable over time.
It sounds like alongside understanding our own patterns, we also need to be able to recognize some of the more toxic character types out there. Not just to avoid them, but maybe to see faint echoes in ourselves.
Absolutely. Awareness is key. Greene outlines several. One vivid type is the drama magnet.
The drama magnet sounds draining.
They are. They often draw you in with this exciting, intense energy, maybe lots of compelling stories. But underneath, they seem to live for confrontation, chaos, and they almost always position themselves as the victim in every situation.
Always the victim.
Their greatest unconscious need is to get their hooks into you, to pull you into their turbulent emotional world. Greene's advice is blunt. If you suspect you're dealing with one, run for the hills before you get completely enmeshed and drained.
Okay, noted. What about the big talker? I feel like we all know someone like this.
Oh, yes. These types impress you with grand ideas, ambitious projects, maybe name-dropping. But when you look closely, they consistently lack concrete past achievements.
All talk, no action.
Pretty much. Secretly, they're often afraid of the actual effort required. They crave attention and the idea of power, but they rarely finish anything substantial. And crucially, they often blame others for their visions not being realized.
And the danger is?
The danger is they'll try to find a sucker, as Greene puts it, someone to do the actual hard work for them while they take the credit or just bask in the glory of the idea.
Right. And the third one you mentioned was the easy moralizer. They sound, well, preachy.
They often project this emphatic, almost saintly aura of moral rectitude. They're very clear about what's right and wrong, very judgmental. But beneath that rigid facade, Greene argues, they're often secretly drawn toward the very things they condemn. There's frequently a hidden hypocritical side waiting to emerge.
Why is that?
It's often a defense mechanism. They lack genuine empathy, partly because they're so busy judging. And they will inquisition you, pick apart your flaws if you get too close, or challenge their moral superiority. Best to keep a respectful distance because their judgment can be relentless.
Okay, it's clear that understanding these character patterns, our own and others, is fundamental. But there's also this idea of a higher self.
Yeah.
Finding a true purpose. That implies an internal conflict, doesn't it?
It really does. Greene posits we have these two contrary selves within us. A lower self, driven by emotions, immediate gratification, the pull towards comfort and conformity, and a higher self, which feels compelled towards improving skills, realizing potential, maybe contributing something meaningful to society, or mastering a craft.
And the lower self is usually stronger?
It tends to be louder, more demanding in the moment. But the higher self is always there, that quiet voice or pull towards something more, waiting to be cultivated and strengthened.
Is there a specific kind of moment when this higher self tends to emerge more clearly?
Often, it's during a crisis, a moment of intense pressure or difficulty. Greene uses the example of Martin Luther King Jr.
What happened with him?
He described a moment late one night in his kitchen, feeling overwhelmed by threats, fear, profound self-doubt. He felt paralyzed. And in that deep inner crisis, he said his inclinations and intuitions suddenly coalesced, transformed into what felt like an actual voice, the voice of God, clarifying his destiny, giving him strength, and offering continual support afterward.
So crisis can forge purpose.
It can be a powerful catalyst, yes. That moment where clarity emerges from the chaos, where you connect with something deeper than your everyday fears and desires.
And this internal guidance system, as it's described, it helps us deal with negative emotions.
Exactly. When we tap into this sense of purpose, engage this higher self, Greene suggests that many of the negative emotions that plague us when we feel aimless boredom, envy, insecurity, tend to neutralize. You become more willing to embrace the necessary tedium of practice, knowing the long-term benefits. Your mind becomes pleasantly absorbed in the work itself. This deep focus fosters creative energy, allows ideas to surface seemingly out of nowhere. It's where genuine purpose takes hold and becomes self-sustaining.
That sounds incredibly appealing. How do we actively cultivate this higher sense of purpose? What are the strategies?
First, Greene emphasizes cultivating your uniqueness. Recognize that your specific combination of skills, experiences, and inclinations is genuinely one of a kind. In a world pushing towards conformity, you cannot truly be replaced. Owning that is a source of real freedom and power.
Okay, embrace what makes you different. What else?
Second, you must eliminate distractions and focus deeply. This requires discipline. Plan for regular, uninterrupted time dedicated solely to your work or craft.
Like deep work.
Exactly. Think of it almost like a religious retreat, as Greene suggests. Steve Jobs famously closed his office door for hours. Einstein would lose himself completely in absorption. You need to create that sacred space for focus.
But there are also pitfalls, right? False purposes that can lead us astray.
Yes, it's critical to be aware of these. One very common false purpose is the relentless pursuit of money and external success markers above all else.
Why is that false? Success is good, isn't it?
It can be, but when it becomes the sole driver, it often leads people into career choices that have little or no connection to their actual inclinations or passions.
And the result?
Often it brings restlessness, deep boredom, even amidst achievement, short-term thinking, maybe a kind of soulless workaholism. Sometimes it ends in burnout, depression, or even a manic crash. Greene also mentions hyperintention here.
Hyperintention.
It's a fascinating paradox. When you desperately want something like success or happiness, that very desperation can make it harder to achieve. Your focus shifts from the process, from the work itself, onto the wanting, which creates anxiety and often sabotages the outcome.
Interesting. And another false purpose you highlighted was conformity.
Yes, the pull of the group. Greene uses the example of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China. The goal was to make young people experience revolution firsthand.
What happened?
Students like one named Jianhua became fervent Red Rebels. They became obsessed with status within the movement, constantly proving their loyalty, fiercely demonizing perceived enemies.
They lost themselves in the group.
Completely. That powerful group dynamic makes people exaggerate their agreement, mold themselves into what they think the group expects. You ultimately lose your inner distance, that vital space needed for independent thought and critical judgment. The goal has to be detaching enough from the group mind to think for yourself.
It's sobering how easily we can fall into these traps. Okay, another law we need to grapple with is grandiosity, knowing our limits. It seems counterintuitive that success itself can be a major trap.
It really is. We humans have this deep innate need to think highly of ourselves. It's natural.
Yeah.
But if that positive self-opinion diverges too far from reality, we become grandiose.
And success fuels this.
Even a small measure of success can elevate our natural grandiosity to dangerous levels. We start to forget the role that luck might have played, or the crucial contributions of others. We begin to imagine we have the Midas touch, that everything we do will succeed.
And we lose touch with reality.
We lose contact with reality, exactly. And that's when we start making irrational, often disastrous decisions, because our ego is driving, not objective assessment.
So what are the warning signs? How do we recognize grandiosity in ourselves, or maybe in a leader?
Look for signs like an overbearing certainty about the positive outcome of their plans, almost no room for doubt. excessive touchiness or defensiveness if criticized, even constructively, and often a disdain for any form of authority or advice that contradicts their view. It often masquerades as supreme confidence.
And there's a famous business example of this leading to a downfall, isn't there? Michael Eisner at Disney.
Yes, Greene uses Eisner's tenure at Disney as a prime illustration, especially after his close partner and arguably reality anchor Frank Wells died tragically.
What happened then?
Eisner's self-opinion,